Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hope Discovered podcast. My name is Bill. If you have never heard our program before, our mission, so to speak, our message, maybe is the right word with our podcast, is that hope happens here. And no matter what you are going through, recovery is possible. It is attainable, and many people have done it. Our subject today is going to be wellness during the holidays. And this can impact people who may be struggling with some sort of an addiction and mental health as well. When it comes to partying, let's say there's a lot of temptations with alcohol and staying up late and a lot of things that can cause a lot of temptations for people who are in some sort of addiction recovery. And there's another aspect, too, to the holidays for people who may be dealing with some sort of a mental health issue, in that the holidays can sometimes bring a feeling of loneliness. So there's a lot of aspects to this, and we are going to be discussing that today with our guest. Our guest today is Danijela Vranesevic. And how are you doing today? First of all, welcome to the program. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's good to be here. It's a good morning, brand new day, full of opportunities and possibilities.
Yes. Oh, well, you're one of those blue skies and chirping birds people, aren't you?
For the most part, as long as I've gotten enough sleep, I tend to be that way. If you catch me on an off day and I haven't had sleep or coffee, I think you'll find quite the opposite.
Okay. Well, it takes me a while sometimes to see the value in the day. So I'm not there with you, but I do my best. Dani is our director of recovery services at CommQuest. Dani has worked in community mental health for nearly a decade, treating dual diagnosis individuals, and has a passion for helping individuals realize the strengths within themselves to reach their goals. Dani is the daughter of immigrants and places value and emphasis on self-actualization and resilience associated with the immigrant spirit. That's awesome. That's fantastic. Let's talk a little bit about your position with CommQuest. Tell us a little bit about that position and what your duties are.
Sure. So my duties here entail overseeing and guiding the services at both of our residential facilities, or drug and alcohol facilities. So that's both Wilson Hall and Deliverance House, as well as the DIP program, or the driver intervention program. And that can range from anything from providing clinical support to staff on a day-to-day basis to fostering collaboration and communication among the different departments that are involved in a client's care. That could be nursing, that could be legal services, clinical care, so on and so forth. Also developing and fostering those community relationships with our referral sources and our community partners. But I will say more fundamentally, it really is about thinking about a vision for the future for these programs, developing a plan for that vision, and then motivating and inspiring staff to get on board with that.
Awesome. Now, are you originally from this area?
I am. So I Stark County girl, born and raised in Massillon, Ohio. I'm a Massillon Tiger, through and through. Yes. So, lots of football, lots of high school football games. My parents still live in Massillon. And ironically enough, I feel like things have come full circle at this point. So my first sort of big kid job, so to speak, after I graduated with my master's program, was at the Crisis Recovery Center just right across the street. So being back over here, it brings back a lot of fond memories from that time.
Well, that's great. That's good. What drew you to this field? I mean, this is a field that I kind of believe that people choose because they want to make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think fundamentally, again, you have to have that at your core. Is just those core values of compassion and empathy, and again, seeing the hope and the vision of what could be for people. I think that's really, really fundamental. But I just have always felt compelled to help other people. Mm-hmm. I think with with where I'm at now in terms of my counseling background, it was just a matter of how I wanted to get there. So at one point I had these sort of lofty goals of going to law school and being a human rights lawyer. And it did really work out that way for me. So I took some time off after my undergrad and just took some time to think and think about what I really wanted to do. And I was working in a job where I really didn't have a lot of interaction with the consumer base and felt really disconnected from that and didn't really feel like I was making a difference. So counseling just seemed like a good route to go. I got a lot of advice and encouragement from friends about, you're a really good person to talk to. You should think about making that into a career. So that's where it kind of led me.
Well, that's certainly the impression that I have of you. Why CommQuest? I know you're recently aboard here at CommQuest. What made you decide that this was going to be a good fit for you?
Hands down the mission. And you said it earlier too, of hope happens here. Having hope is probably the single most important thing when it comes to treatment outcomes for folks. If clients don't have that, it's going to be very hard to make change. So that's most important. Providing that collaborative care and advocacy for people through the work of mental health, addiction recovery, and social support. So important. So on board with that. I think it's also the vibe of community mental health. That was where I started my career. And I've always just felt that sense of teamwork, that feeling of just, the people are so down to earth. And I just really love working with traditionally underserved groups. I think there's such a need for that.
Sure. Are you, as we begin to talk about the holidays, I'm going to go out on a limb here, being that you're an optimistic person, that you enjoy the holidays. Is that true?
Yes, I do. I do really enjoy the holidays. One of my hobbies is cooking. So it's a great opportunity to showcase, some of those skills. And, I love being able to do that for friends and family. I also really love the downtime, just having some more time to just kind of sit and relax and reflect on, all of the trials and tribulations of the year. I love that. But, it wasn't always the case. So growing up, my family didn't celebrate the holidays on the traditional calendar days that we would do here with them being from another country and being from a different religious background. So it was somewhat of a lonely time growing up until I sort of, developed my own connections and so on and so forth. So today as it stands, yes, I do enjoy them very much.
Well, I got to tell you, I'm going to be honest here. I'm kind of a Scrooge. I'm not one of those people, and that's okay. This is a good segue into what we're talking about. There's a lot of people who aren't necessarily a fan of the holidays. They have to deal with, their in-laws or, their cousin Joe or whatever. And he's real loud and they don't like him. And that's fine. And that's not what we're talking about today. What we're talking about today is a little bit more of a chronic issue. So, as we said, the holidays can be a very fun time of year for a lot of people. But, here again, not for everyone. Let's start with those in addiction recovery. What steps can people take to avoid the temptations of holiday parties? And we always hear so much about the good cheer and the celebrations that comes along with New Year's. What are some of the steps that people can take to avoid those temptations?
Sure. I think most fundamentally self-care. And I think sometimes when we hear the word self-care, it's almost framed as something that we should be doing in times of high stress or crisis. But it really is something that we should be doing, something towards every day. That's fundamental so that we do have those reserves built up when we're under times of stress. So most important thing. I think second, setting limitations around those stressful events or situations that could be triggering because of, the amount of alcohol being passed around, so on and so forth. Difficult people that you might run into in those situations, knowing that it's okay to say no and decline invites is okay. But if you do decide to go, if you decide that this is something that you want to do, if it's important for you to do that, then you certainly should feel empowered to do that. And there are so many things that you can do. And I think that's another important piece of this is just knowing that you have the capacity and the resources to get through, right? So some little tips and things that you can think about is BYOB, bring your own beverage, carrying that drink with you so that other people aren't tempted to walk up and say, hey, would you like, a beer beer or wine or whatever that might look like. Role playing ahead of time is also something that's really valuable and useful, as well as just being able to really practice some of those skills when it comes to being assertive and declining, again, those drinks that might be offered to you. If you are in a situation and you do feel triggered or you feel like you're having a craving, I think that's a great time to implement some of those CBT and craving management skills. So those things that you've learned in treatment and now get a chance to apply. And I think the important concept here to remember is that, a thought doesn't have to become an action. There's a big gap in space between those two things. So knowing that there's tools that you can put into place. Having someone in your sober support network on speed dial is really important as well, to be able to process those things in the moment. I think processing any feelings of resentment or self-pity that come up around those situations is so important, because sometimes it can feel like, well, why don't I get to do the things that other people are doing? And being able to get out of that headspace and mindset is so imperative. If all else fails, having an exit plan is important too. Having a ride that you can call, and knowing someone that's going to be there, that's going to be able to take you away from that situation, if that should be the case. And I think lastly, and I think, this is probably my favorite recommendation or suggestion, is getting out of yourself and doing service for other people. That's a big thing. I think that helps. That helps us foster that sense of gratitude. That's really what fundamentally the holidays are all about.
Yeah. I would call it a very strong influence. I worked in the restaurant industry for many years. I was part of the nightclub business. I did a lot of work with bands and stuff. And this time of year would often bring in Christmas parties where people would take, their employer would bring everybody out for a night of fun at the local place and hear the band. And what happens in a lot of those cases, and this can be very tough, is you have maybe a lot of people who aren't normally drinkers, and they're not necessarily, battling addiction, but they get the effects of the alcohol to the point where their inhibitions drop. And I don't believe that they mean to do it, but they sort of coerce their coworkers. Come on, just one drink won't hurt you. It's New Year's. It's a little champagne. It's no big deal. And especially when you're in an office environment, you're trying to get along with everyone. You don't want to be the person to say, hey, no. But sometimes it comes down to that. Is that correct?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Sometimes it's just about politely saying no and walking away. Right. And chances are, given the way that you've described the party, there's probably so much other things going on for that person to kind of partake in or engage in. I think it's also feeling like you have the capacity and feeling empowered to let people know that you are in recovery and having ownership in that as well. And I think sometimes when people don't know, they tend to kind of push. But if they do know, I think in most cases, 9 times out of 10, they are going to be respectful. Sure.
And that's the way it should be. When it comes to holiday depression, this is something that a lot of people can struggle with. And we don't typically associate the holidays with depression because of the fact it's always considered a festive time of year. However, there's a lot of people whose life, their circumstances have left them alone. And loneliness, the idea that the rest of the world is having a good time, can really be a trigger. And this is especially true when it comes to grief. So many people have memories associated with family members, in Christmas past, whether it be their parents, their grandparents, that always made Christmas seem so special. And now those people are no longer there. What can people do to minimize the negative impact that the holidays may have?
Yeah, absolutely. That can be a tough time for folks who have maybe lost someone or a number of people in their life that made the holidays as special as they are or can be. Again, I'll go back to that idea of that preventative self-care. Building up those reserves so that when we do experience times in our life, those kind of pitfalls or those valleys, that we've laid the groundwork for how we can respond to those in a healthy way. So utilizing those healthy coping skills. So again, that's first and foremost. I think also limiting exposure to social media, that can be something that's triggering for folks in terms of seeing, photos of other people with their loved ones. So limiting your exposure to prevent the negative emotions that might come along with that. Setting realistic expectations around the holidays is another one. And what I mean by that is acknowledging that change is a part of life. And, I think grief can mean a lot of things. It means loss fundamentally. And sometimes that can be, a child has moved away, or they've gotten married and now they have some traditions or, some things that they're doing with their in-laws. So acknowledging that things aren't always going to be the same and knowing that's a part of life and that's okay. I also think developing new connections is important. So it's a fantastic time to join a support group, an organization, a club. Engaging in non-holiday related winter activities can be a really good idea as well.
Yeah, sure. When someone that is close to you, whether it's a friend, a family member, let's say you have a suspicion that this person maybe recently had a death in the family, or they seem very withdrawn during the holiday season. What are some of those warning signs? I kind of mentioned one, but what are some of those warning signs, and what is the best way to reach out to them? And sometimes that can be awkward because you don't want to say, are you lonely because your children moved away? But
because heaven forbid they say, no, I'm not, and bye-bye.
Exactly, right. Yeah. So what can be some of the best ways to recognize that and approach them about it?
Yeah, so some things that might be indicative that someone is struggling would be changes in mood. Obviously sadness, irritability, problems sleeping. You mentioned isolation and withdrawal. And those typically begin in November and then end after the new year. For that holiday related depression. I will say though that sometimes there aren't any signs. People can put on a smile or present really well, and they may really be struggling. So I think that's an important factor to consider. And we've heard stories about that in the media of, everything seemed fine. They seem like they had it all. And then, something tragic happens to that person. Right. So I think just, really just checking in on people, just saying, hey, how you doing? And maybe that's a text message or that's a call, whatever that might look like these days, but just letting them know that you're there and that you're available.
What are some of the other ways that you can reach out to your friends or loved ones to support them? And when is it time to recommend, and I know this can be a very delicate thing, but when is it time to recommend to them that they might need to seek professional help?
That's a great question. One of the most important things when we're reaching out or engaging in those discussions with our loved ones is really just to listen with empathy. I think sometimes when we're trying to support someone, we think that we want to be able to fix. We want to problem solve, and that becomes very difficult. And it's really just about listening to that person with empathy, without judgment. So a couple of suggestions are engaging them with supportive statements and validating their strength and sharing, which can be so difficult for some folks to just talk about open and honestly what they're going through. I would consider referring or encouraging someone to seek professional support when their symptoms become prolonged. So if it's past the holiday season, it's the first of the new year and they're still struggling, that can be a problem. When you think there might be any safety concerns with the person. So if they're saying things that may be indicative that they want to hurt themselves, that they want to hurt another person, or that they're really just down and out, another time to think about referring for support. And lastly, it would be if their symptoms are interfering with their activities of daily living to some extent. So if they're missing work, if they're not taking care of their hygiene, if they've let themselves go, so to speak, continuing to isolate and withdraw, that's another indication that seeking professional support is recommended. And really having someone there that's licensed and trained to do so, to be able to properly support and treat that person. And it also takes the stress off of the loved one to feel like they need to provide that type of intervention, and they really can't.
There are pitfalls of addiction and mental health, all year long, certainly. And Christmas and New Year's are not the only festive holidays. There's St. Patrick's Day. Halloween is a big bar holiday. I don't understand that one, but there are some people who just love Halloween. So there's these temptations that come along all year round, and depression associated for the same reasons that we're talking about, feeling left out. What is the best way year round to reach out for help if you're feeling these types of things?
Sure. Well, contacting your local mental health and addiction services board in order to get connected to resources is a great place to start. They've got a lot of referrals for whatever type of service that you're looking for. And often that comes with an assessment to place you in the most appropriate level of care. If you're looking for more of an immediate service, there's a crisis text line, which is a great resource. So you can text 4HOPE. So that's numerical 4 plus the word HOPE to 741 anytime and be able to chat with someone. And then if you're local, you can also reach us here at CommQuest at 330-445-2677.
Dani, I often ask this question in a broad sense at the end of these interviews. So much is going on with overdoses, with mental health and other things in our society. And as everyone knows, Ohio in particular has been a hotbed. But it seems like in certain areas, things are improving. What would be your message of hope for people who have any number of these things going on in their lives and then with their family? Yeah,
my message would be that change it's always possible. It's always reachable. I think if you're here and you're willing and you can just buy into a little bit of that hope in your heart, I think there's a potential for wonderful things.
Absolutely. Great message. We have been talking to Danijela Vranesevic, who is the Director of Recovery Services at CommQuest. Thank you, Dani, so much for being on the program.
Thank you, Bill, so much for having me. It was a pleasure. And I hope this reaches who it needs to reach. And I hope everybody has a wonderful, happy, safe, blessed holiday.
Thank you. And I do too. I believe the holidays are my positive spin on the holidays. It's a great way to reset. Just like sometimes we need to reset our computer, we need to reboot. The holidays can sometimes be an opportunity to do that. We can reboot and go into next year. So I hope everyone has that opportunity this year. Just a little reminder, if you want to find out more about CommQuest and the things we do here, I would direct you to CommQuest.org. And once again, that's CommQuest.org. Thank you very much for listening to our podcast today. You have been listening to the Hope Discovered podcast by CommQuest. Have a great day.